Section 1. In the vast, chaotic inventory of human assets, there is only one commodity that is truly finite, non-fungible, and impossible to hedge: time. Every financial transaction is, at its core, a negotiation against the clock. We are taught to view interest rates merely as the cost of borrowing money, a lever pulled by central bankers to heat up or cool down an economy. This is a dangerous simplification. The interest rate is something far more primal. It is the price of time itself, the precise numerical value humanity places on the present moment versus the uncertainty of the future. It is the heartbeat of civilization, measuring our collective capacity to delay gratification in exchange for a better tomorrow. When this mechanism functions correctly, it builds empires. When it breaks, societies consume their own foundations. Now, let's open the ledger and audit the system that determined the cost. To understand the machinery of wealth, we must first strip away the noise of modern derivatives and high-frequency trading and return to the fundamental unit of economic analysis, the decision to wait. This is the concept of time preference. In the forensic audit of economic history, time preference is the discount rate applied to the future. A high time preference indicates a desperate urgency, a demand for immediate consumption regardless of the long-term cost. It is the mindset of the hunter-gatherer who eats the entire kill today because the future is too uncertain to trust. Conversely, a low-time preference is the signature of civilization. It is the willingness to forgo the meal today to plant the seed, build the tool, or lay the foundation for a cathedral one will never see completed. When we audit the origins of capital, we find that capital is not money. Capital is crystallized patience. Consider the classic economic model of the lone fisherman on an island. If he catches one fish with his bare hands and eats it immediately, he survives, but he accumulates no wealth. His economy is stagnant, trapped in a loop of high time preference. However, if he chooses to starve for a day, deferring consumption, he frees up the time and energy to weave a net. That net is a capital good. It serves no purpose for immediate gratification. You cannot eat a net. But once deployed, it amplifies his productivity, allowing him to catch 10 fish in the time it previously took to catch one. The suffering of the starving day was the price he paid to lower his time preference and acquire a technological advantage. In a complex market economy, this dynamic is expressed through the natural rate of interest. This rate is not an arbitrary number invented by a policy committee. It is an emergent phenomenon, a signal generated by the aggregate psychological state of the society. When a society collectively lowers its time preference, saving more, consuming less, the pool of available savings expands. By the laws of supply and demand, this abundance of savings drives the natural interest rate down. This low rate is a vital signal. It tells the entrepreneur that resources are available and that the society is willing to wait for long-term projects to bear fruit. It makes the construction of factories, the funding of research, and the building of infrastructure mathematically viable. The ledger clearly shows that every golden age of human history, from the Industrial Revolution to the post-war booms, was underwritten by this specific alignment, a culture of high savings leading to low natural interest rates, fueling genuine capital formation. However, the integrity of this system rests entirely on the link between the psychological sacrifice of saving and the mathematical reality of investment. The savings must be real, represented by unconsumed resources, for the capital structure to be stable. If the signal is falsified, if the interest rate is manipulated to suggest a surplus of resources that does not exist, the entire architecture of patience begins to warp. We are establishing here that the price of time is the most critical variable in the economic equation. It dictates whether we build for the next century or plunder the present. As we move to inspect the modern financial engine, we must ask, what happens when the price of time is no longer set by the saver but by the printer? Section 2. If the natural interest rate is the economy's compass, guiding capital toward true north, then central banking in its modern iteration acts as a powerful magnetic anomaly. We have moved from a system where interest rates were discovered by the interaction of savers and borrowers to a regime where they are dictated by committee. When we audit the mechanics of this intervention, we witness the systematic distortion of the most critical signal in the market. This is not merely a policy adjustment, it is the falsification of the ledger. The distortion begins with a fundamental decoupling. In a sound money system, credit is constrained by real savings. A bank can only lend what has been deposited. For a loan to be issued, someone else must have deferred consumption. This physical constraint ensures that the length of investment projects matches the society's willingness to wait. However, under a fiat standard with fractional reserve banking and central bank liquidity injections, this constraint is severed. The central bank expands the money supply, pushing interest rates below their natural level. To the market participant, this artificial credit looks identical to real savings. The bank account numbers are the same, but chemically they are distinct. Real savings represent unconsumed resources, steel, labor, energy, sitting idle, ready to be deployed for construction. Artificial credit is a claim on resources that do not exist. It is a phantom receipt. When the central bank suppresses the interest rate, it effectively lies to the entrepreneur. The lowered rate screams a specific message. Resources are abundant and society is patient. Start your long-term projects now. Relying on this signal, businesses calculate the net present value, NPV, of massive capital-intensive endeavors, skyscrapers, new tech platforms, gigafactories, and find them suddenly profitable. They borrow the cheap money and break ground. This is the genesis of the boom. It feels like prosperity. Construction cranes dot the skyline, employment surges, asset prices tick upward. But this activity is not based on a new surplus of wealth. It is based on a hallucination. We are witnessing malinvestment, the allocation of capital into lines of production that are unsustainable. The entrepreneur begins building the upper floors of the skyscraper, believing there are enough bricks to finish the foundation. But because the consumers haven't actually saved, because they haven't reduced their consumption, the bricks aren't there. As these new projects compete with existing consumption for the same finite pool of labor, energy, and raw materials, the shadow engine begins to overheat. The forensic evidence of this conflict is what we call inflation. Prices for commodities and labor rise not because value has been added, but because the system is engaged in a tug-of-war between the consumers, who are still spending, and the investors, who are trying to build. The market is trying to reveal the truth that there aren't enough resources for everyone, while the central bank's policy tries to suppress it. But the damage of distorted time preference goes deeper than just inflation. It rewires the psychology of the entire market. In a natural system, the risk-free rate, like a government bond or a savings account, offers a modest but positive real return. It rewards the prudent saver for their patience. When central banks force rates to zero or essentially negative levels in real terms, they declare war on patience. This is the era of financial repression. The saver, looking at a bank account yielding 0.01% while inflation runs at 3% or 4%, realizes they are being slowly liquidated. To preserve their purchasing power, they are forced to migrate out the risk curve. The grandmother who should be in safe bonds is pushed into junk debt. The conservative pension fund is forced into leveraged real estate. The retail worker is lured into speculative crypto assets or meme stocks. The system effectively criminalizes low-time preference. It creates a speculative mania where the only way to survive is to gamble. The capital structure becomes top-heavy. We see the rise of zombie companies, firms that cannot cover their interest payments from operating profits, but stay alive solely because they can refinance debt effectively for free. In a healthy market with a functioning time price signal, these companies would be liquidated and their resources released to more productive uses. In a distorted market, they act as parasites, trapping labor and capital in unproductive stasis. Furthermore, this artificial environment shortens the horizon of corporate strategy. When money is free, financial engineering becomes more profitable than actual engineering. Why invest 10 years in R&D to build a better engine when you can borrow $1 billion at near 0% to buy back your own stock, driving up the share price and triggering executive bonuses next quarter? The price of time has been set so low that the future holds no weight against the immediate gratification of the present tick on the stock exchange. When we strip the balance sheet down to its studs, we see the tragedy of the artificial boom. It is not a period of wealth creation, it is a period of capital consumption. We are eating the seed corn, burning the furniture to heat the house, and calling it GDP growth. The distortion of the signal has convinced the world that we can consume more than we produce, and that we can build without saving. But the laws of economics are as immutable as the laws of physics. The discrepancy between the artificial signal and the physical reality cannot be sustained forever. The bill is accruing, compound interest is ticking, and the margin call is inevitable. Section 3. The audit now moves to the final and most painful entry in the ledger, the liquidation. In economics, there is no such thing as a permanent plateau. The divergence between the artificial interest rate, the map, and the real availability of resources, the territory, eventually becomes too wide to ignore. This is the societal margin call. We have been conditioned to view the recession, the bust, as the catastrophe. Policymakers frame it as an exogenous shock, a virus attacking the healthy body of the economy, requiring immediate emergency intervention. But the forensic accountant sees it differently. The boom was the disease, the bust is the immune response. The recession is the market's brutal attempt to realign the price of time with reality. It is the liquidation of the malinvestment, the halting of half-finished skyscrapers for which no steel exists, and the painful release of labor from zombie companies back into the pool of productivity. However, in a regime dominated by high time preference, the political system cannot tolerate this correction. The pain of the cure is immediate, while the health it restores is in the future, a trade-off that a high time preference society is structurally incapable of making. So, when the margin call arrives, the central banks do not allow the clearing mechanism to function. Instead, they double down, they print more, they suppress rates further, they engage in yield curve control. They effectively pay the margin call with a bounced check. This frantic avoidance of the short-term correction guarantees a long-term systemic collapse. But the cost is not just measured in GDP or inflation percentages, it is measured in the degradation of civilization itself. When a currency loses its ability to store value across time, it destroys the mechanism of intertemporal exchange. If the money you hold today will be worth significantly less in 10 years, the rational response is not to save, but to consume immediately. We see this manifested in the decivilizing process of the broader culture. Look at our architecture. We moved from building stone cathedrals designed to last a millennium, projects initiated by men who knew they would never see the spire completed, to constructing drywall strip malls with a 30-year useful life, designed effectively as disposable packaging for commerce. This is the architectural embodiment of high time preference. We build for the now because the later has been discounted to zero. The infection spreads to the social fabric. When the unit of account is corrupted, the ability to plan for a family, to invest in multi-generational education, or to steward the environment is eroded. Society devolves into a collection of hyper-short-term speculators, chasing immediate dopamine hits and quarterly yields, unable to visualize, let alone finance, a future beyond the next election cycle or fiscal quarter. The shadow engine of credit expansion has not just hollowed out our industry, it has hollowed out our timeline. We are consuming the capital accumulated by our ancestors and leaving a liability for our descendants. The ledger proves that a society that cannot wait cannot survive. Conclusion. Ultimately, the audit reveals a simple, terrifying truth. You cannot print time. No amount of liquidity injection can create the hours required to build, to learn, or to grow. Wealth is not the number in the bank account, it is the freedom that comes from having mastered the clock. The true cost of the fiat system is that it stole our patience, and in doing so it mortgaged our future. To reclaim our prosperity, we must first reclaim our willingness to wait.